Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're taking a lunch break right now. Annette Insdorf is here, and she is the instigator of all of this. Well, we'll explain, I think, soon as I give my introduction. Thank you, Annette, for being here. Thanks for taking the time. We were just talking about you. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes to let everybody enter. And then I'm excited to say that Anna Winger will be here with us. For those of you who joined us at the Tikkun, I'll say this now before everybody comes in and joins us at the Tikkun. This is a redo of our Tikkun event, which was on the eve of Shavuot at midnight. We were going to have this conversation. Sadly, Anna slept through her alarm to wake her at 6 a.m. in Berlin. I had to dance for an hour. For those of you who joined us for that, we raised a lot of good questions, so we hope to answer many of them today. What I like to do, as I always mention, first of all, I'll mention that right now our Israel Film Center Festival is going on. Tonight we're having at 5 p.m. a conversation for the film Mossad, which was the most popular film in Israel last year. We're going to have the star of the film, who's actually well known from Fauda. He's gonna be joining us along with the director, so please join us at 5 p.m. There's limited tickets left for that. See the movie this afternoon and then join us for the Q&A. And then many more films coming up all week. Tomorrow we're gonna have a Q&A with the film Unchained, which is directed by Yaron Sheni, who directed the film Ajami, which was nominated for an Academy Award. And many, many more. So check out that full schedule. We'll put that in the chat, israelfilmcenter.org/festival. Oh, it's in there already. Wonderful. And I'm going to jump right in. You are here for the Unorthodox event with the creator of the show, Anna Winger. Anna, please, you could turn on your camera and join us here. Oh. Please welcome Anna. She's coming on. It's working. There we are. Almost in the flesh. Live from Berlin. Yes. Thank you so much for being here. Folks, if you're done looking at your friends, this is the time where you could switch now to speaker view. So you could see us a little bit bigger and focus on those that are talking. So a big thank you to Annette Insdorf, who introduced us, because we were both Annette's students. And then we were proud to host the, I think, premiere of
Yes.
only live screening of the first episode of Unorthodox at the Merlin Marson JCC Manhattan. It, I think, was our last screening before we shut down. Anna was supposed to be there and sadly could not. So this is take 3, and we're excited to have you for this conversation. And let's jump right in, if you don't mind. Tell us, first of all, Anna's background, for if you haven't seen her show, Deutschland 83, and now you're up to 89, you mentioned?
Yeah.
89 is in production. Check those out on Amazon as well. And tell us a little bit about how you got involved with making Unorthodox.
So Unorthodox, you know, I live in Berlin, I should clarify. I am American. I've lived here for a while, actually a long time. I've now lived here for 17 years. My kids were born here. And Deborah Feldman, the author of a memoir called Unorthodox, that was the sort of basis material for the TV show. She also lives here, and our kids go to school together. Like, full disclosure, this is really a project that grew organically out of you know, friendships among all the people involved in it. And Deborah and I knew each other as mothers and as writers, and we became friends. We both had moved here from New York. Obviously her story is very different from mine, but we had nonetheless all kinds of things that connected us, and our kids go to school together too. I mean, they're friends with each other at school. And at one point she said to me, like, why don't you make a TV show of my book? As you do. No, I mean, I love the book, and I had, you know, read it in one weekend, but it wasn't a natural fit for a TV show because it's a memoir which takes place primarily in her mind. You know, it's just a different animal than, you know, when you're writing a screenplay. a story really needs to be activated in a way that's really very different from writing a memoir. So, but we know each other quite well, and she trusted me, and so she gave me the creative freedom to work with the material, kind of break it apart and put it back together and reinvent it for screen. And then Alexa Karolinski, who is a documentary filmmaker, she's from Berlin. And she made a film that I loved called Oma and Bella. I don't even know how to recommend where you can see it, but it's—
I think it's on our streaming site. I think it's on Israel Film Center stream, if I'm—
Okay, everybody
around.
has to watch it. It's a documentary she made about her grandmother and her grandmother's best friend, who lived together in their 90s after their husbands died, and would cook the food of their childhoods, and they sort of talk about what it was like in the camps and about it was like then. They were then both in a DP camp, in a displaced persons camp in outside Berlin, and they ended up staying in Berlin and making their lives here. And they were very young when they came out of the concentration camps. One was in a labor camp, and their story is told through cooking. It's an amazing piece, and it's an amazing portrait of the city as seen through the experience of these two Jewish women. And I just absolutely loved it. And I got to know Alexa after I saw the film, and we really respected each other's work. And when this project came up, I knew that she was the person I wanted to write it with. And we had, in a way, the project really came out of conversations we were having anyway, so that was the kind of the best kind of project comes about, through friends.
And one of the things about the show that I think makes it so great is its authenticity, and you put a strong emphasis on making this, exploring this world of both the Orthodox world and somebody who leaves the Orthodox world. And how, I don't know if your background gave you some of the inspiration for that, but how did you make sure that this was as authentic as possible?
Well, I'm a secular person. I would say that on the spectrum of Jewish experience, certainly Estes is at the opposite spectrum from my own. But I also have to say that the deep dive that we did in writing this and sort of learning much more about Hasidic culture, it was much more familiar than I would have expected. I just have to say that at the outset. There was a lot of things about, we interviewed many people. We took 2 big research trips to Williamsburg that were hosted by Eli Rosen, who was our Yiddish translator, who was actually there at the screening in New York. He also played the rabbi in the show. He's an amazing guy. He's from Borough Park. He left the community in his 30s. He was a cantor. He is very knowledgeable about many things, all the different Yiddish dialects, and he's incredible with language. And also with religion. He's an incredible singer, of course. And we did 2 big research trips to Brooklyn, where we had got a chance to talk with people and touch and feel and look and ask questions. And then Ellie moved to Berlin, and he actually brought a lot of his friends with him. So we had a lot of people around us to talk to about, it's not just a question of costume. Of course we made mistakes. You always try really hard to get everything right. And the more you get right, it's almost like the things you got wrong stand out as a result. And so we've certainly been told all the little things that we got wrong, but we made a really strong effort to get things right. And to be fair, there was also debate about many things. Sock color, sock height, once you get into like these details, there's no end to the discussion. And that was also kind of fun and funny. I think that we went into it wanting to portray the world through Estes' eyes. I want to be really clear that I don't see this TV show as an anthropology of the Hasidic world in Williamsburg. It's really the story of one young woman and her subjective experience of her marriage, of her family, of her environment, and of her choice to change her life. And We also set out to make it in a really visual way that was expressionistic, so that we're seeing both Williamsburg and Berlin through her eyes, right? We're seeing, the color palettes are different. One is darker, one is lighter. It's Berlin in summer. It's really colorful. We deliberately chose, nonlinear architecture. We made a lot of creative choices that had to do with kind of expressing Este's view of the world. So, but yeah, we tried really hard. I mean, it was obviously easier for us to get the Berlin part right, but we tried really hard to get the details right about the Williamsburg Hasidic world. And one of our actors actually was raised Satmar. He plays Moishe, and his name's Jeff Wilbush. And he grew up in Mea Shearim, but he's Satmar, and so he spoke already the same Yiddish, because there's many different kinds of Yiddish, and he and Deborah are from the same community, so they spoke this kind of Hungarian Satmar Yiddish. So he was also incredibly helpful. I mean, he was always on set. Ellie was always on set. So
I have to admit that Moshe was my favorite character of the show.
sure.
And
He's not in the book. And people who read the book after they see the show, they're like, well, when do we get to Moshe? I'm like, oh, no, Moshe's the one we made. Which is, we took a lot of liberty with everything, but I love him too. He's a great character.
I mean, there are a lot of people I think that want a sequel to the show, but I want a prequel to the show with the backstory of Moshe. I think that was suggested by one of our guests here during the late night event. In case you want to.
Moshe was, my other show is a spy show, so I'm deeply identified with that kind of fiction, and I love to write that sort of character. And so he was a little bit of my, he was, my kind of fixer guy. I love his character as well. And we followed a lot of the fan fiction that people have written on social media, and there is this suggestion, which is really interesting, that he's married to the college teacher, the woman who teaches Este how to be a bride.
Okay.
There's been all kinds of things, and fans also suggested that not only is he married to her, and that's his estranged wife, but that the rabbi is her father, and that's why he's so invested in kind of reviving Moshe.
I love this. There's a whole universe here. This is great. But this is actually a good place to discuss the casting, which you mentioned. The guy who played that's Moshe is actually from the ultra-Orthodox community. How did you choose? The most interesting one for me, of course, is of course the lead actress and how you casted for that role. So I'll let you tell us a little bit on that process.
So obviously the big challenge of this show is that it's in Yiddish, and very few people speak Yiddish unless they're living in the community, right? So there was a limit to how many people we could find who had left and become actors. And so we started a search for Este, and it was really difficult because we were looking for somebody who could play a combination of very fragile but very willful. And we wanted somebody who was believably young, quite young, but also had this kind of survivor instinct and strength that you believe that she would actually do something this crazy, and that's not an easy combination to find. And we also, of course, needed someone who could learn to speak Yiddish very quickly and very well. And we did casting in London, Paris, Germany, New York, and Israel. And we had this wonderful casting director in Israel named Esther Kling, and she brought Shira to us. And the crazy part was, even though I had seen Shtizzle, I had seen the first season of Shtizzle, but because she made Shtizzle in 2013, she's much younger, So when I saw her audition after, we saw so many different young women, it was one of those moments where all of us, me, Alexa, Maria, who is our director, everybody who was in the room, we all were like, this is it. Like, she's the one, there was no question. And then there's something about her, she has incredible star power. She's actually a wonderful person as well. She's super intelligent. She's very sensitive, philosophical person. And she's been acting for a few years, so she's actually had small roles in a number of movies, but you know, she was so kind of ripe to be a star. You know, she just had, her performance was just amazing in the audition, and she sang in the audition. And later, if you haven't seen her singing audition, I can send it to you. She sings Hallelujah, and she was so good in the audition because we needed someone who not only could learn to speak Yiddish but also could sing, or we wanted someone who could sing, do their own singing for the role. And it's just an amazing audition. So if I send it to you, everybody will understand. You're welcome to post it. Everybody will understand why, how she got this part. And we didn't show any other actress to Netflix. So it was just her.
Wow. Oh, so she is actually singing at the end?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not for those who didn't see the last episode. Spoilers. It's, you know.
Yeah, you know, it was funny.
We've quarantined you for enough time to watch the show. I hope you've all seen it.
We finally released her audition because so many people asked if it was really her singing, and we didn't think that was fair. So we wanted people to see her audition because she's just such a talent.
That's amazing. She's also now, just for reference, she's in the film called Asia, an Israeli film that just won an award at the Tribeca Film Festival in a virtual way. And so she's really having a moment, which you were ahead of the game with. Yeah, that was, she was fantastic. Did she meet Deborah, and did she take anything from her experience and her mannerisms?
Not at the beginning. So we decided, there was a lot of discussion of that. We decided that, you know, Esti had to become her own character, and that she didn't want to meet her before as she was developing the character. But then they did meet once we started production, and they became really good friends, which was really cute. In fact, over New Year's, Deborah went and visited Israel and hung out with both Shira and with Amit, who plays her husband. And one thing that was really nice that I think created a lot of intimacy on set was the fact that Amit and Shira have known each other since they were really young. So they had to do these really difficult sex scenes together, and they're really good friends. So that made it, you know, there was a lot of trust between them, and that was great. So they've both been acting since they were quite young, so they knew each other.
So this was one of the big questions that I wanted to ask about the reactions to the show. And the show, of course, I feel has taken off. I live on the Upper West Side, and I think everyone on the Upper West Side has seen that, but that might not be really a great study of the entire world. I'd love to know how this is performing outside the Jewish world, and the reactions to it. And we joked earlier about how some of the reactions outside of the Jewish world, for some people who have never met a Jewish person, seeing the show, and I was just thinking of that because you mentioned the sex scenes, this might give them a very unorthodox way of connecting, yes, pun intended, to the Jewish community. So I'd love to hear about some of the reactions internationally.
So yeah, less of a surprise to, I mean, I guess we hoped that the Jewish world would enjoy it. But what's been really surprising and wonderful is how popular it's been in places that we just never even considered. It wouldn't have been an obvious place for people to watch it, like Saudi Arabia and Argentina, Japan, India, I mean, Turkey, where people just say, this is my story. I mean, they're so identified with Esti's story. Women, men, you know, it's really crossed borders of faith, culture, even gender, and in ways that just really moved all of us. We have a chat with all the actors, and you know, because everybody was at home and had time to peruse social media, we had a lot of we shared all the most interesting things that were being said online about it, and it was really moving, a lot of it, you know. And of course, it was a lot of people who've never met anyone Jewish, let alone anyone Hasidic, who felt very identified with her. You know, I think it was almost no criticism. I mean, it was never like people said something negative about her or about her community. It was more that they said, that reminds me of my life and my community. So I think that especially in the Catholic world, the Muslim world, the Hindu world, so there was a lot of bridges, you know, between unexpected places. And, you know, even in the course of the story, we tried to incorporate, you know, differences in Jewish identity. You know, we have a Israeli character who she meets in Berlin, who kind of understands exactly who she is right away and is more critical than the others. She's the, her name's Yael. She's the musician who tells her that her piano playing isn't good enough at the end of episode 2. And, you know, I don't think we set out to represent Esti as like the only, you know, kind of Jewish person in the world. You know, it was more, you know, we wanted it to be clear that there's different people coming to the same. I mean, even when they're talking about the food, when they have dinner together, and she says it's Jewish food, and I think that what's interesting is to sort of watch Esti discover that there's a world beyond the borders of what she's been told. You know, that not only is the trauma of the Holocaust something that's shared by many other kinds of Jewish people, you know, but also food, you know, it's all of it. It's history, it's food, it's culture, that it goes beyond the borders of where she's been told those borders lie. So I think that's part of her discovery of the world, is discovering that.
So I'm just shocked that they have this show in Saudi Arabia. I wonder how is there Netflix there? Is that?
Yeah. And in Jordan, and then it's everywhere. It's in 190 something countries. So it's like, for us, I mean, listen, you know, you make a show, you see the people you're working with every day. It's incredibly, I mean, you know, filmmaking is this incredibly intimate process, right? And when you're in the thick of it, you're not thinking about the audience because you can't. You have so much to do, and you're so, you know, you can hardly see beyond, you know, just the little group of you. And so the launch on Netflix, you know, it's just not like anything else. You know, I've never made anything for Netflix before. It's like they just drop it in the world, and they literally drop it in the world. Like it comes out the same minute in all these countries. And then that combined with social media, combined with quarantine, meant that all of a sudden there was this global conversation about the show happening like across, you know, in many directions. And that was something we could never have dreamed of, you know. You know, Maria, who directed it, her last film is a really beautiful art house movie that's about the last days of Stefan Zweig, the Austrian Jewish writer, and in Brazil, who killed himself in Brazil. And the movie is called Farewell to Europe, and it's really beautiful. If you can find it, I really suggest watching it. But she was, you know, when they told us the numbers of how many people had watched the show, you know, we couldn't even compute it. It was just so beyond, you know, it was just Netflix is a different experience than.
Can you share those numbers? Can you shock us?
Like in the tens of millions. It was like many tens of millions of people.
Wow.
Finished it, you know. And then what was really funny for us was that they watched the making of, because we made this 20-minute documentary that actually, I have a mentee at the film school here, and she made it, and it was almost like an afterthought. We thought, like, it was right before we started shooting the wedding. We were like, we have to document this. You know, this is crazy what we're doing. We have to get some footage of this. So how about Marley makes a documentary? So Marley shot all this, and then at the end, Netflix was like, this is great. Why don't we put this on the service? And I don't know, all of it sort of happened unexpectedly. And so what was interesting for us was just that not only did so many people watch the show, but they also watched the making of. And so then they felt like they knew everyone involved, which was very cute. It's really nice.
So you bring up another interesting point here, the wedding scene. So that's, I think, in episode 2.
Yeah.
And that takes up a big chunk of the episode from the New York perspective. I'm interested in knowing, did you like put together a full wedding there and shoot it?
Yes.
And why? I mean, it's a 4-episode show, and it goes as fast as lightning. You guys are telling the story like I remember my wife was saying to me that how are they going to get this all together in one last episode after seeing it?
Oh, sorry. That's, I don't know how to turn that off. My apologies.
Yeah, I have it on my computer too. I gotta figure out how to disconnect that. But but there was such an emphasis on the wedding, and really
Yeah.
you showed a good portion of that Jewish wedding, Orthodox wedding. Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about that experience.
So we felt that it was a really important moment. We felt like we needed to show, first of all, how hopeful Esty feels, right? Like how this is really the moment where she thinks her life is going to be transformed. It's the moment she's been looking forward to all her life. Um, and it's the moment where all of our characters come together in the same space. It's actually the only time that everybody is there, with the exception of the people she meets in Berlin, including her mother, right? So everybody's in the same place. And there was such long conversations about which parts of the wedding to show, because, in the end, it's only 5.5 minutes worth of wedding, but it feels, it would have been hours. And there was a lot of discussion, especially with Ellie, about which parts we definitely needed, which parts we didn't have to show, and how to make sure that they weren't, in religious terms, actually married, right?
Ah,
And he changed certain things of what they say to make sure that technically we wouldn't be doing something that would offend anybody, that they wouldn't be technically married through what he said. And even though they're fictional characters, we were really careful about that. And we beat it out through just many, many, many conversations. And then there's the dancing. And because we shot it in Berlin, it wasn't that easy to find enough extras. A lot of people from the Jewish community wanted to be extras, and from the Chabad community also came, which was great. But we needed a lot of guys with big beards. And so we were like, it's Berlin. So we were literally like casting hipsters on the street who had big beards and being like, do you have any interest in doing this? Because you can't make everything we had an incredible wig person who did. We always joked that this was a show where the men needed way more hair and makeup than the women, because just attaching everything was extremely challenging. There were so many people doing men's hair, but the beards were very difficult, and it was also really hot. And so we had to, it was better to have guys who had beards than have them have glue for the beard. So, these are technical things, but it's funny when I think back on it, it was really challenging to get, 100 guys with big beards. And we have this amazing costume designer, Justine Seymour, who she sort of designed the strimals because they were so expensive that we couldn't, there's many things about them. First of all, they cost more than $1,000 each. Second of all, they're made of real mink, and there's like 6 minks. So we decided we didn't want to use real fur, and so she designed these strimals. She did such a good job. They're made of fake fur, but they still have the crown on top, and they're lined with silk and everything. So a theater company in Hamburg made the hats. So there was just a lot of behind the scenes work that went into making the wedding, and then we shot it over the course of 48 hours in a Palestinian wedding hall in the north of Berlin. And yeah, and it was in a very Muslim neighborhood, and a lot of the people in the neighborhood came and sat on the street and watched. And, it was kind of amazing. Some of the kids were extras, it was sort of a only in Berlin situation. And of course it was surreal. It was like, what are we doing here? All of it was crazy. And then we shot in New York. We did all the exteriors in New York and all the interiors in Berlin.
Fabulous. I could ask questions all day, but I want to give time for for our audience to ask questions too. I'm going to ask one last question as our audience prepares. And if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and we'll open up your mic. I know we have some questions already lined up. I wanted to talk about you're a Jewish woman living in Berlin, and the Holocaust thread that plays throughout the show. I would say it's very different than my experience with modern Berlin today and my life as a Jewish person. And I wanted to know a little bit more from you. What were your intentions with writing that thread of the story and how that plays out?
Well, there was a couple of things. One is that, you know, when you live here and you raise children here and that's part of your history, it is something that you can't not think about. I mean, obviously, this is Berlin, you know, it's not anywhere. It's not, you know, bad things happen in many places, but it's still, this is Berlin, right? So we were not going to avoid that. It was deliberate, right? Because we felt that in escaping where she comes from, and I don't like to use the word escape, but like searching for something else and sort of searching to emerge from from the sort of inherited trauma of her childhood, we wanted her to return to the origin of her family's trauma, and we thought that doubling back on history was really important. And you know, there's something about Berlin that's very weird. You know, it's where many terrible things happened, but it's also where there's, you know, hundreds of years of Jewish history also, and there's many things that resonate. You know, it's not as simple as like a bad place. It's also a familiar place. You know, years before I lived here, there was a show at the Jewish Museum in New York that was about the relationship between Berlin and New York. And when I first moved here, I thought about that exhibit a lot. And it was weird because I saw the exhibit before I had any intention of living here. But it really stayed with me because a lot of ideas that we have about cosmopolitan culture and, I don't know, modern life even come from a time when there was a lot of Jews living in Berlin. So and there's now, again, so many Jewish young people who live here from Israel, from the United States. We definitely wanted to incorporate that into the show in certain ways because, you know, Deborah lives here herself, and also the language is part of that because, you know, the Yiddish is, I mean, it's really close to German. It's weird. I feel like no one ever said that to me. I mean, maybe that was obvious to people who spoke German, but it definitely wasn't obvious to me before I lived in Germany. I didn't know so much about Germany when I moved here, but it is uncanny that if you can speak German, which now I speak it because I live here. Once we started to work with the Yiddish, I mean, it's a slightly different sentence structure, but it's closer to German and Yiddish are closer than like Bavarian and German, you know? So it's easier to understand coming at it from German. And then it has some Hebrew in it, of course, and it has some Slavic things in it, but it's a mixture, but the language has its origin in the sort of German Jewish experience. So that we found also really interesting, and we wanted to reflect on that in the course of the show.
For sure. I know my grandfather, because he spoke Yiddish, helped me with my German friends a lot, and it was an interesting bridge between these communities.
Have you ever lived in Germany?
No, only visited. But for some reason, I feel that my generation, I'd say, I have a lot of German friends, and I connect very well with the young, no longer so young German community. And this generation, I'd say third generation, forms an interesting bond that maybe is related to the past and not just to where we are right now.
Kind of shared culture. It's interesting. Yeah, I think that's
so
it's hard to talk about. So we tried to talk about it in more elliptical ways. You know, we didn't want it to be on the nose, but we also wanted to acknowledge where we are, where they are, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting that sometimes in a German Jewish mixed group, you'll you don't want to mention it, and yet there might be so many questions from both sides, and like, where was your grandfather? And then other times it comes right up, and can be actually very fruitful conversations about guilt and how we remember. I want to give an opportunity to other people to ask some questions. I know we have a lot of questions from the audience right now. The first question is from Helena Finn. Helena, you're on.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's lovely to see you. We met in Berlin when I was at the embassy. Yes. Wonderful to see you. Thank you for making this brilliant and profoundly moving film. There are 1,000 things I want to say about it, but I'll stick to my one question out of fairness to all the other wonderful questions I see in the chat. You used music in this film as an underlying theme. And I thought it was very interesting that when Esti at the end enters the competition, she sings her grandmother's favorite song, which is a reference to German history of the family. But then she sings the song that we presume wins the competition. I left this believing that she was getting that scholarship. And she, in this second one, she sings in Yiddish. And I'm wondering, were you thinking about this as an affirmation of her Jewish identity? In other words, she wasn't escaping, she wasn't leaving, she was just transforming her way of being Jewish in the context of being in Berlin. So that's my question.
Oh yeah, we definitely didn't feel like she was leaving being Jewish so much as just transforming who she is. And the song is in Hebrew and it's from her wedding.
Oh, sorry, yes.
It's a song from episode 2 that is traditionally sung by a man. So the point is it's a song from her wedding, from a moment when she was really happy, and it's sung by that she's finding her, I mean, not to be too put obvious a point on it, but she's finding her voice. So she's singing a song that's traditionally sung by a man.
Right. Wonderful. Well, it was very, very, very touching. Yeah.
Next is Bruce Winters. Bruce, you're on.
Okay. Yeah, I really appreciate the movie and the accuracy, and it just obviously was done extremely well. As a Jew that grew up in Brooklyn and knew many, many Orthodox people of all different sects, but was never Orthodox, or really never Orthodox. I'm sure a lot of people on the call come from that background, but really have an appreciation for the Orthodox and their ways and why they do certain things. And although we might not agree, the concern that I had, and it looks like other people on the chat also have that, is that when either unaffiliated Jews that were never affiliated, or in particularly non-Jews, see the movie, are you concerned that they're going to be their view of Jews, that the movie is going to be their overall view, and they're going to kind of extrapolate and say, so this is what the Jewish community is about, and this is what's important to them, and kind of put us all in one bucket, which is always a concern, and then it really comes out much more negative as to what the narrow thinking of Jews and the very focused narrow life that some of them have.
Again, we never approached this as an anthropology either of that community or of Jews in general. There is another Jewish character in the show, but I also just don't think it's such a negative portrayal of that community. I think there's a lot of positive, and very few people leave. It's not, this is a story of one young woman who tries really hard to make it work, and her story is very specific to her. Because one thing I'm sure everybody noticed that makes her life distinct is that she has no siblings, and that is not the story of almost anybody from that community. There were probably like 10 people in total from the community involved in making the show, and all of them, the ones who've left, had tons of siblings, and that's a really big difference, because if you leave and you have all these people in your family of your generation, then you have a really strong connection to where you come from, because you don't give up your brothers and sisters, so all of them have quite strong connections with their, if not very strong connections with their siblings. So I think that one of the things that made Deborah's story really different than other people's, and then certainly Este's in the show, because at this point, Este's is not Deborah anyway. We really heavily fictionalized this show, is that she really is leaving almost nobody behind. She has this relationship with her grandparents, but she's alone in her generation, in her family, and that she's quite alone on earth, and she doesn't feel like she's protected by anybody when she can't figure out what to do with her marriage. So I think, I guess we didn't feel that the community looked so terrible in this series, but also I just don't think that we didn't feel that people we were never saying like, this is the way, this is, for me as a writer, the stories that are most interesting are very specific. I make another show that's about a young East German spy who's sent to the West undercover. And, you know, that's a very specific story about one person from East Germany or from the Soviet bloc who goes into the world. And it's not, you know, a condemnation of everybody who grew up on the other side of the Iron Curtain, you know. It's just, it's really his story. And I feel that way about this project as well. So it's, I guess we didn't think that would happen, but I also can tell you just from having been the recipient of so much feedback, I don't think it is what happened at all. I think that people, if anything, felt very positive about what they saw. So that's the only way I can answer that question.
And I think this is a good opportunity. I always love to mention organizations that are doing fabulous work in this field, and to mention Footsteps, which is an organization for people who are leaving the Orthodox world. And if there's one thing that I would take away, as if I try to see an outsider's perspective, is the lack of education and resources and support that people who want to leave a community have, and really Footsteps is an organization that tries to provide some ways of people to enter modern life out of the Orthodox world. And they, of course, are featured in another Netflix film called One of Us. Documentary, One of Us, yeah.
Which, by the way, is much more negative. I mean, of course, I've seen that documentary, and I think that's a very different story than the one that we told. But it's, you know, I think it's a delicate balance with, you know, telling one person's story and not speaking for the whole, you know. I think that's important. You know, we would have had to make a lot more episodes to speak for a whole. But I have heard, by the way, that there are many projects now cooking that take place in this community. So if I'm thrilled if we've opened the door to more Yiddish productions, Yiddish speaking productions, because I have heard that they're thinking about redoing Shtizzle in LA, and about a couple of other projects.
So what do you make of this as an insider from Netflix? They have Shtisel, they have One of Us, they have Unorthodox, of course. Are they like, okay, this is the flavor of the month for the Jewish community? Where was there any sign of them
So
kind of?
They didn't make Shtizzle, right? It was made in Israel in 2013, right? And they acquired it. And they have a couple of other things on the service that are also acquisitions that speak to Jewish experience. I don't think they made One of Us either. I think they also acquired it. I think our show they definitely made, you know, it's a Netflix original. But what's funny is that we didn't see Shtizzle until after we had started writing this show. So I think that it must have come to Netflix like last fall, sorry, the fall of 2018. Because it was, I remember when we discovered it, it was like after we were in the writer's room already. So, you know, they never reveal their data. So I don't know. But of course we thought that was curious too. We were like, okay, I suppose they've identified, you know, an interest. But then again, you know, Netflix has so much stuff on it that I suppose they've identified a lot of interest. So we're just noticing that one because it speaks to our experience or our interests. But there's so many things I've never even managed to get through. You know, there's so many rabbit holes on Netflix I haven't looked through. You know, so yeah, I don't know. Nobody tells you that stuff.
Fascinating. But they were probably like, oh, a show about the Orthodox community? We'll take it.
Well, we'll see. I guess the only way to evaluate that is how many more they make, right? Since ours is limited, we'll see if they suddenly pop up 6 more.
They seem to be producing a lot. Let's take a question from Rebecca. Rebecca.
And I want to echo everybody else's feelings that this series was really remarkable. And I love that it was created by so many strong, vibrant women.
Yes.
To that end, the character of Etsy's mother was so intriguing to me. And yet she wasn't really highlighted in the series.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if it was intentional to give her a smaller role and to not delve more deeply into her past, because it clearly had a profound effect on Etsy. And
Well, I think if we were to make more at some point, you know, someday, one story that really interested us was her mother's story as a young woman in England and coming to Williamsburg. We felt like, actually, you know, if we were to do more of this show at some point, I think the interesting stories are her mother's story, being raised in England and then coming to America and in this arranged marriage and everything that happened there. And then also Bobby's story in the displaced persons camps in Europe, and then coming to America and her conversion. You know, I thought that was also really interesting, because when I hear stories of that time, you know, and obviously I live in Germany, so I've heard a lot of stories of people who were in the DP camps after the war. And, you know, there's this moment, to me, it's like a post-apocalypse, I mean, real story. You know, it's like all these very young people come out and everybody's gone and they've lost their families, but they've missed their youth, and they are, you know, 19, 20 years old, and they've suffered, and they have to decide, now what? Like, how do we rebuild society? How do we rebuild Jewish life? How do we rebuild, how do we move forward from here? And, you know, some people became very religious, like Bubby, and, you know, some people moved to Israel, because that time was also when Israel became a country. And then, I mean, so many things happened in that period of time between like 45 and 50. People came to America. And I think that in that moment, I think Bubby's story always has really interested me, like how it came to pass that she became Orthodox in that space, and sort of the charismatic rabbi who kind of drew them into it, and her immigration experience in America and all that always really interested me. But the mother's story also really interested me. And, you know, we were just going with like very simple facts about her that were in the book, that she was British, that she was married to a woman, that she, you know, that she had, I also happen to know that Deborah has German citizenship through her mother's side. So that's something I just happened to know. So we kind of we were fictionalizing, so we made up the story around her. But yeah, I agree. You know, if we had more space, we could definitely delve into her. I mean, I also love the actress who played her. She did an amazing job. She's really very intense and great theater actress as well. So yeah.
So we have a question from Caitlin. Caitlin, you're on.
Hi there. I just wanted to ask a question, since obviously there's not a lot of Jewish speakers, particularly from Berlin, or I'd say Yiddish speakers, particularly from Berlin. Obviously, I know that like Dutch and German both have a lot of similarities with Yiddish, so it's not terribly hard to piece it together. But how did you ensure that they were learning Satmar accurate Yiddish?
So we had this guy named Eli Rosen. If you watch the making of, he's speaking there. He was our Yiddish coach and translator. He translated the scripts. He also helped with the scripts, because, you know, it wasn't just a question of how you say it in Yiddish. It's also what they mean differently. You know, there's stuff that isn't just language. Like, it's not straight language. It's also about meaning and about how, like, how people use language in speech, you know, was really important. And there's like 13 or 14 different kinds of Yiddish. And one of the guys who plays, he plays Yankee's brother, Aaron, he runs the Yiddish library in Paris. And if any of you are ever in Paris, that's an amazing place. They also have a theater. It's in the 10th arrondissement. And Tal, he runs it. So I had met him originally because I had gone there when I was first doing research. And so that was, he was a real specialist also, you know. And then, like I said, Jeff, the actor who plays Moishe, is a native Yiddish speaker, and he's also really a linguist. So he also could really differentiate, because he knows he speaks Satmar Yiddish, but he also has an ear for Polish Yiddish, for example, which is very different. In Germany or in Berlin, you meet, you know, older people who speak Polish Yiddish much more. You very rarely hear a Hungarian Yiddish here. But you know, once you get into it, it's delicious. Like, it's so interesting sitting around with a group of people who speak fluent Yiddish, and young people at that, because there were probably 10 people who had left the community who were involved in the show in some way. when they all speak to each other, and then they're all so good at like, well, you could say it like this, or you say it like this. And Burman Jews didn't speak Yiddish. I don't know what that means, but I'm not sure what she's saying. But sorry. Yeah, German Jews didn't speak Yiddish at all. The people who speak Yiddish here now are all Polish Jews. Just to clarify that. The reason that Yiddish is like German is because it originated here and then migrated east in the Middle Ages. So it's historical that it's connected to German, but by the time in the pre-Holocaust era in the 20th century, German Jews did not speak Yiddish. But and that's why those 13 or 14 different kinds are all sort of spread out across the Eastern European different Jewish worlds there before the war.
Annette Insdorf has a question. Annette, you're on.
Yeah, I had sent a question about the Aunt Malka, because Esty first lives with her. And I wondered if she was a widow, because this community is so rooted in family and the expectation of offspring. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about Aunt Malka.
Okay, so what was funny about Malka is we had an extra, like a guy who was technically her husband, but in the end, that never shook out in the piece. Like she was such a focus for us as a character, and the actress who plays her is amazing. She's an Israeli actress who is part of the new Yiddish rep in New York, and she is just so good that somehow none of the scenes where she's interacting with her husband ever ended up on screen. And actually all the girls who are around, for example, when Esty is having her head shaved, there's other girls in the room, and those we always imagined as Malki's daughters. But it is true that in the final version of it, you have the sense that Malka is just this kind of goddess with no family around her. And so it does appear that she is widowed, or most likely not divorced. There aren't so many people who are divorced. So yeah, I guess widowed, but she does, yeah, no husband ever really made manifest. So yeah, that was a problem, I guess. This is really a story primarily about the women, but, and the two guys who, yeah. I think I couldn't hear what she was saying. Oh, I think Annette was still speaking, but I couldn't hear her. Oh.
Can we unmute Annette? I can't unmute.
Okay.
There she is.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I just wanted to add that this was not a problem. There are many moments in this magnificent series where I know that if I had another hour with a character, whether it's Malka or Esty's mother, I would learn an entire new layer of experience. And it's just that there are many like grace notes in the narrative where I go, oh, I wonder what made this character end up here and this way. Look, I thought that the character of Yankee in the hands of lesser filmmakers would have been stereotypical and I would have dismissed him quickly. But what we see of Yankee in your hands is that he is so sensitive and so ill-equipped, so ill-prepared to deal with Esty and her world that you have to feel sympathy.
Thank you.
I want to jump off that actually for what will be my last question.
I just have to say that Annette was my professor at university, so that was very meaningful for me. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
The only reason why we let her ask these questions.
And she looks exactly the same. She hasn't aged at all, which is unlike the rest of us.
And Annette is busy these days, also still active with programs at the 92nd Street Y, so check those out as well. But I wanted to ask, there was a moment where I have to say I'm embarrassed when I was watching the show and thinking about how's this going to end and hoping that this doesn't end too tragically. And hoping for a moment somewhere in my head, and it's hard to admit this publicly, that they would get back together.
Of course. I'm glad you thought that. We wanted you to feel that. It's a romantic tragedy.
And yeah, so my question really is in the writing, from the story perspective, from that storyline, and there's a lot of ways to go here, and I don't need to be convinced, but how would you explain why she leaves him and why she chooses not to get back together with him? And especially, wow, at that end, I mean, him cutting off his payas is such a dramatic moment of like, okay, forgive him, go back. He's not that bad.
because she's seen the world. It's like you can't go back. I think she's seen too much. You know, it's it's biblical. You know, she's left the Garden of Eden. It's not. It's just she's seen the world, and it's not. I think it's also not that he's a bad person. It's that he can't. You know, he needs the community in a way that she's discovered that maybe she. Ooh, what's happened?
You're here. We hear you. We see you.
Oh, can you still see me? Okay, I just don't see
Yeah.
you. There we go. Okay. So, you know, for us, it was really important that a part of you believes that they might get back together, that you sort of wish for it, you know, because it's obviously she's choosing a more difficult path. She's choosing it, you know. You know, she's still choosing it. I mean, it's still. He's not the right person for her. You know, he couldn't stand up for her when he needed to, right? But it doesn't make him a terrible person. It makes him a product of his time and place, you know? So, you know, it was really important to us to activate him as a character and really give him a voice as well. You know, it shouldn't be so easy. It would have been so too simple to make him, you know, no question that she'd go back, you know? Also, you know, I think that in the show, there's a lot of characters who are on different spectrum. Let's say if there's a spectrum of being in and out, you know, he's very in, she's questioning it, her mother has left, you know, and you know, there's a moment of conversation between Yankee and her mother where he says, "Don't you miss anything?" And she says, "I miss plenty, you know, but I couldn't make it work. But it's not that I don't miss it, you know. You don't get to tell me what was meaningful for me about my community." And then there's Moishe, who is trying really hard to make his peace with it as well. So you know, it was important to us to have characters who were at different places in their journeys.
I had mentioned the other night when we had this event that I compared it. It's not just leaving Eden, but also to Plato's Fable of the Cave, and how when you're inside that world.
I love you. I love that you just mentioned that. Go on.
How you're inside, when you're inside that world, when you're inside the cave, and your language is shadows, you can't even imagine anything else. And I actually find it extremely, like, you know, anyone who could actually journey out for a moment outside of that world, and maybe we are all in our shadows here.
I'm now always going to say that that's what I was thinking. I love that you just brought that up. That's very good. I'm going to appropriate it. So yes.
But yeah, of course, it's something that's extremely brave and takes a lot of power, and I'm glad that story is being told, and that telling the story of a person who finds their way out and into such a different world, and finds their way and chooses to stay in that world, is really something that I think is timeless. So. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
This conversation will be on our YouTube channel for those who asked and want to know. I know there's a lot more questions. People want to know what happened to the baby. Where's the baby? I know the baby.
I can tell you right now, the baby came to set. He's 13. He's into filmmaking, and he's very cool. Oh. His name is Isaac. So yeah.
Nice. I also made a mistake, and our conversation tomorrow is for the film The Electrifiers as part of our Israel Film Center Festival. So join us for that. It's a comedy about an aging rock band from the 80s. So it's a fun film. Please join us for that. It's a unique Israeli production as it's independent. You rarely see that out of Israel. And finally, I want to just also take this moment to really note the power of our community during these days. And I feel that we should be saying something about how even during these trying times, and especially during these trying times, our community needs to be active and needs to get together, and our voice needs to be heard. And I'm really proud to be a member of this community. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, so much. We look forward to more, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Join us again.
Bye-bye.